Okay, so now we're on to what if you abandon something and other issues with your property. So if you have an ownership interest and you abandon it, you lose it. You lose both your actual and reasonable expectation of privacy. So suitcase tossed in a dump, done. You don't pay your fees on a storage locker, abandoned. You park a beat up airplane on a public airport. Yeah. In this case, the police looked in it, but they didn't go in it, and they said it was at a public place. It wasn't. That's not a search, and it was in plain view. In the Hoey case, there was an apartment. He hadn't paid rent. He had signs that he had the garage sale. He hadn't lived there in a month. The landlord called, and drug paraphernalia was found. And they said, no, you abandoned it. You didn't pay rent. You sold your stuff. You hadn't been there for a period of time. That's abandonment. Thomas was the same thing, like for a mailbox, and he hadn't been there in a year, and they said, it's abandoned. You don't have a reasonable expectation when it's abandoned. In Smith, he was carrying grocery bags and he threw a bag on hood of car. He said abandonment. Rudolph case, he had already checked out of the hotel and they found spy stuff in the trash can. He said they said he checked out of the room, so the garbage is fair game. Now, if he still had an interest in the room because he was renting it, then that would have been a search, because you can always pull things out of the trash, at least in a hotel room. It's different. The McDonald case, there were bags on a bus. They were in an overhead bin. Everyone got off the bus. They checked. When they got back on, they asked, whose bags are these? And no one answered. And so the court says that they abandoned it. But Professor McGoldrick hates this case. He said they're absolutely wrong. Why would you cop to that? He doesn't think they are abandoned. And I don't think it's true either. Okay, so now we're talking about open field doctrine and curtilage, which I think I've mentioned before is the first time that I'd ever heard that word. So there's an observation of sale of illegal liquor on someone's property. The police so basically the holding of this case is looking at things in an open field is not taking of something mentioned above. All it was the product of observing from a forest. So the open field doctrine says that it doesn't have to be a field and it doesn't have to be open. Awesome. But this applies to anything that is removed from the home. So areas closely connected like curtilage are protected by the 14th Amendment. No. Well, if you're a state. Curtilage and anything closely connected to the home is protected by the 4th Amendment. But an area that is removed is not protected. So if you've got a lot of land, stuff very close. So that stems from the language of the 4th Amendment says that what is protected is person, house, thing, paper, effect. So a field, even though it might be your property, the 4th Amendment does not say your property is protected. It says your person, house, thing, paper, or effect. We have some issues over the thing, but we're not going to go into that either. At least not now. Limitation. Okay, so you have to say, like, is it connected to the curtilage? And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Can it be seen from the outside? If it is, no reasonable expectation. All right, so after cats, seizure of a conversation was found that it is covered by the Fourth because they used electronic. Led people to believe that the Fourth wasn't limited to person's houses, papers, and effects, because in cats it was voice and voice conversation. The rationale, though, is list not intended to be a limitation on Fourth Amendment rights. So, in this case, it's not. In the prior case, it was. Welcome to law. Okay, so open field doctrine still applies because things observed in an open field are not a search. So in Oliver, the police enter a person's property, they climb fences, they ignore signs, keep walking, and in the back of all that, they discover a marijuana field. They didn't have a warrant, and of course, they say the search was a violation of the Fourth Amendment, but they said it wasn't connected to the home, and so it's not protected. Members of the public might go onto the property. Members might trespass. So McGoldrick brought up that sometimes, like, it probably depends on what state, but the theory is the same even if you aren't. But in maybe like more rural states, it's more common to walk through other people's property. Okay. So the hypo was a shed in an open field. They opened the door. That is protected because they are opening it. So you can't open things on these properties. You have to be able to view it out in the open. Opening sheds or lifting tarps, not covered by this open field doctrine. But the open field doctrine is limited. Okay, things observed as being on it. This does not include the opening, digging, lifting of things. So another hypo, police observe person in open field tending their marijuana crop, and they have a microphone on an adjoining hillside, and they focus on the person in the field, and they take their conversation, which is incriminating, from a neighbor property. Is this a search? Yes, it's a search because this is cats. Electronic seizure is always a seizure. Electronic seizure of a conversation of which you are not a part is a search, restraint, sidewalk, home. Okay, so if you can't overhear it with your natural senses, you're not going to be able to get it. And then we have the Dunn case. Climbed over barbed wire in order to get to the barn in the house. Climbed fence. The barn has netting and camouflage over it. You can look through the netting and see a drug factory. And was the barn an open field? It was a barn, part of the curtilage of the house. From open field, you can look into curtilage, but cannot enter curtilage or enter the home. So you can observe what's on the curtilage. That's fair game. The barn itself was about 50 yards from the fences surrounding the house, and it had its own enclosure. So it was not part of the curtilage because it was actually set off from the curtilage. But 4 factors to look in determining something like a barn is part of curtilage or part of the open field. And those things are 4 things to decide, is this part of the curtilage or an open field? The proximity to the house, whether part of the same enclosure as the house, which in that case they are not. The principal use of where the police are looking, so what kind of intimate activity you expect to go on. As I said before in another video, like, is it a bathroom or is it a chicken coop? We don't expect a lot of private activity to go on in a barn. Apparently they have not seen like every country movie in the world. Anyway, And then they also say steps taken to protect the property. But obviously that one's not big if they're saying that in that case, like the netting over the whole barn and also barbed wire and fences and signs and all of that. Like, so they're factors, but yeah. Anyway, so in that case, with the barn, the court concluded it's an open field and not protected by the Fourth Amendment. It's not a search. Anyway, and then there's the Hatfield case. Police officer from neighbor's property looks over and sees marijuana growing, and that is allowed. If you can see it with your eyes without any issues, that's going to be the case. And then we have some exceptions to cats, because we always have exceptions. In cats is reasonable expectation of privacy, and then it also says like electronic seizures, things you can't see with your natural senses, they're going to be a search, they're going to be a seizure. So the White case, undercover investigation, wore a wire in White's home and transmitted the conversation out to the car. And the rule is that's not a search. The logic to that is if someone tells you of their criminal activity and you repeat it, this isn't a search. No reasonable expectation of privacy that the person you're telling it to will keep it to themselves. So if you tell someone else, reasonable expectation's done. If a friend can repeat it, not a search for the friend to record it. If you reveal information to third parties, you lose your reasonable expectation of privacy, and that's the rule. Another important exception, though Cat says electronic seizure without a warrant is a violation, this case says you can record any conversation that you can overhear with your natural senses, and you can record any conversation someone working with the police can overhear with their natural senses. So if a person hearing it can overhear it, that is with their natural senses. A person recording it for the police have to be able to overhear with natural senses. So it just can't be electronically enhancing to hear. And then we had the Miller case, and that said when you reveal banking information to your banker, you also lose reasonable expectation of privacy as your financial institution and the government can get it from the bank without a warrant. However, there has been some statutory things that have happened, which good job legislature, because when people don't like things, they should change it by law. Okay, and then we also talked, the standard for a warrant is probable cause. For a subpoena, relevancy is the standard. And okay, one more thing before we end this one. In the Smith case, the government put a PIN register to see everyone that this person was calling. And they said since the owner of the phone revealed his phone numbers to the phone company, he lost his reasonable expectation of privacy and the government can get it as well. Since the owner of the phone revealed his phone numbers to the phone company, he lost his reasonable expectation of privacy. Giving numbers you call to telephone company equals you give them to the world. And that's gonna be where we end right here.